I'm Caroline Hyde. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the tech surprise stories of 2017, from FANG dominance to Yelp M&A. We discuss the potential winners that investors should keep an eye on. Plus, a car that talks to your house. We head to CES and talk cloud-controlled autos with Harman's CEO. And as cybersecurity concerns surrounding Russia are front and centre, we hear from the former CIA director Jim Woolsey on the president-elect's approach. But first, to our lead. Tech sector surprises of 2017. RBC is predicting that Amazon will undergo a major investment cycle this year. Well, that's not a new concern for investors who've worried about the company's bets on original content and ramped up shipping efforts. But RBC says Amazon's reached a point where it can shell out big bucks and still boost its margins. This, as the company says, the number of merchants using its logistics service rose 70% to more than 2 billion in 2016. And its virtual assistant Alexa makes waves with the new home appliance partnerships at CES. For more on Amazon and the rest of his top tech surprises to watch this year, we're joined by RBC Capital Markets analyst Mark Mahaney. Mark, great to have you on the show. Let's kick it off with Amazon, making waves over at CES. You say the money can still come in terms of profits.
The one big difference between Amazon today and Amazon 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago is that they've got this business called AWS, Amazon Web Services, the cloud business, which has got margins that are 10x greater than its core retail business. 25% margins, operating margins versus 2.5%, 3%. And what that means is that they've got a lot more cash with which to make investments, and they're saying it quite loudly. We're going to make aggressive investments, but we believe we've reached a point of scale where we can do that and still run the business profitably. I think that cloud cushion, if you will, cloud cash cushion, allows them to do that. It's
one of your top picks for 2017 in terms of investments. The FANGs overall, so adding Facebook to that, Netflix. Let's have a look at where potentially the FANGs could perform versus S&P. We've got a chart for you, and we saw last year, not so pretty. They did lag the S&P 500 overall as a benchmark. What about 2017?
So 2015 was the year of dramatic outperformance. It is rare, very rare, to see outperformance 2 years in a row, especially after that magnitude. That group of stocks rose over 80% in 2015. Going into 2016, frankly, up until the Trump election, the sector actually had outperformed, and then we've had this Trump rotation away from growth. I'm not sure how long that lasts. I fully respect that that's going to be a headwind for a while, but we think there's one or two really interesting stories in the large cap internet space and amongst the FANG names. First is Netflix. We think they can add more subs in both U.S. and international markets in 17 than in 16. If we're right on that, we think the stock goes higher. And secondly, Facebook. Facebook modestly outperformed the market this last year, but it's dramatically derated. The multiples come down a lot. It's at a point now, for the first time in 3 years, we think we can make money on the long side, both on estimates revisions, upwards estimates revisions, and on the multiple going up.
Just looking at the chart there, we saw that Facebook actually performed in order of their letters. We had Facebook win, then Amazon, then Netflix, then Google was the laggard for 2016. But therefore, they can beat the overall market. Google, I want to dig into the laggard of 2016, because you say that actually, finally, some of their outside bets could actually bring in some money?
Well, so that would be a surprise. And when we say surprise, we think it's something that probably won't happen, but the odds are greater than the market ascribes to. Netflix is also, its multiple has come down because people become very skeptical about the other bets. Where is the money coming out of autonomous vehicles? What about Nest and home automation? We haven't seen anything. Google Fiber has been cut back, and there's been some management changes amongst those bets. So the market has kind of tuned out that segment, and we think there's enough interesting bets that are put in there, enough people, and enough, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, there's probably one or two or three winners, and we think Google could be one of those. When is hard to know, but we think if any one of those bets starts to show any materiality at all, that would be the surprise for investors.
Talking of winners, and therefore let's shift it to losers, you actually think the market is too optimistic on the pain setter that is Twitter?
Boy, that stock has underperformed 2 years in a row. We think it could be the case again this year. It's our sell in the large cap space. And the street believes that there's going to be a reacceleration, even if modest, a reacceleration in growth this year.
Revenue could rise about 10%.
Yeah, and that could be a risk. We actually think there's a reasonable scenario under which revenues actually decline. This company literally goes X growth. We're not seeing it in terms of advertiser interest. I know President-elect Trump is interested in Twitter.
What do you call him?
President-elect Trump.
Yeah,
oh, the tweeter, yes.
What do you call it?
A tweeter-in-chief, I think, is what we call it.
I love that.
But outside of him, we haven't seen major advertisers, fully embrace Twitter. And in fact, at the margin, they seem to be pulling away from it. That's a problem.
So Twitter doesn't look too pretty, despite the tweeter-in-chief, as you call him. A little bit more about the politics side of things, though, because you're saying this is still a bit of a concern when it comes to the FANG investment. But overall, maybe one of the surprise calls is that actually Trump doesn't change the tech outlook at all.
Well, so two things. One is there clearly has been a rotation towards new areas. I mean, this has been a very slow growth economy for a while. And so premium growth stocks like the FANG names, like the internet names, the high quality ones have outperformed. Now that the rest of the economic growth seems to be picking up, I get the point that there's less of a need to pay for premium for growth because there's growth in other parts of the economy. In terms of whether Trump would actually have an impact, President Trump would actually have an impact on the internet stocks, it's unlikely, but there's two areas that we watch out for. Net neutrality, changes there could negatively impact Netflix. And then this talk about these border adjustment taxes or putting taxes on changing how you would allocate costs to companies, that's something that could have a material negative impact on Amazon. We don't think that's going to come to pass, but those are two watch areas for us.
And one outside bet, just to leave us wowing with, it was a call last year and it didn't come to bear, but will Yelp get bought out this year?
We like the company fundamentally. That said, we've also liked it for the last 2.5 years as a strategic asset. It's $2 to $3 billion. It's a great play off local advertising, albeit just in the U.S., and possibly local transactions. So we think there's a range of bidders out there, and we actually think now you've got a more willing seller than you did a year ago. And in order to have a sale, it takes two, and this time you finally got a seller that's willing to sell.
Two to tango. Mark Mahaney.
Yeah.
Great reading your note. Loved having you on the show. Thank you very much indeed. We hope to have you on again from RBC Capital Markets. And on the latest tech funding board, well, Apple is planning to invest $1 billion in SoftBank's giant new technology fund for global startups. According to a person familiar with the matter, Apple joins Qualcomm, Foxconn and Oracle chairman Larry Ellison in contributing to the $100 billion fund. Apple said it's been working closely with SoftBank for many years and believes the new fund will speed the development of tech that may be, quote, strategically important to Apple. Now, SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son told President-elect Donald Trump last month that about half of the fund would be invested in the U.S., creating about 50,000 new jobs. Coming up, we'll speak to the CEO of Harman live from CES as the company rolls out new innovations in the booming industry of auto tech. That's next. And a reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. right here in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Let's head now to Las Vegas, Nevada, where the Consumer Electronics Show is getting underway. Among the announcements, Harman, one of the leaders in connectivity in the automotive industry, is launching a new platform called Ignite to make tech inside cars more straightforward and interact seamlessly outside the car, too. We're joined now by Dinesh Paliwal, CEO of Harman. Sir, welcome to the programme. And, well, apparently CES this year is all about autonomous vehicles. It's all about voice commands. And it looks like with your Oasis concept car, you've got a bit of both.
Caroline, there must be a lot of echo here. Could you please come again one more time?
Apologies, a few technical issues, Mr. Paliwal. Talk to us about your Oasis concept car. Tell us what you've been announcing at CES today.
Awesome. Well, first of all, you know, CES last year was all about connectivity, and we were really doubling down, all of us as an industry. But this year, we are actually showing in live technology implementation of 4 pillars of connectivity. That is really cloud applications. That is really about collaboration of many technologies from Apple, Samsung, IBM, Google. And then third is customization, because more and more automation you bring in, it's getting complicated for users like average you and I. And we want to customize, bring the human side to machines, to the cars, to the home. And the fourth, which is most important for me personally, which all the US political scene has been talking about, the hacking, the cybersecurity. You cannot have connected home, connected car unless you have a secure networks around, and cybersecurity is very important. So these 4 C's of connectivity, the mega trend we are really showing here in home as well as in the car and the enterprise.
You're talking about driving in a self-automated car, coming up, and it already seamlessly talks to your garage and opens the door for you. Internet of Things in the car, talking to the home. When is this a reality, not a concept?
You know, it's Caroline, is actually more than a concept now. As technology, I think technology is ready. The infrastructure, the roads and the cities, we're not ready yet to deploy, because we have 800 million cars on the road today. They are driven by human and they're not intelligent. So from the timing point of view, I think 5 to 10 years are the sweet spot where you will start to see proliferation of these technologies, where a lot of other things also have to catch up. The cybersecurity network and the whole infrastructure has to really evolve, because we cannot risk all the data and the human life and hold the network through the cloud. This is a weak spot right now. So what we're showcasing, that is ready, but OEMs, like all the German OEMs, the Japanese, the Americans, they have spent hours and hours here discussing how do we implement the cybersecurity in their cars. So really the next 3 to 5 years would be most exciting in terms of implementation.
Who wins, the tech giants or the car giants?
Who wins? I think consumers win, because I think we have a very clear segregation of responsibility. The way I see it, the car companies, they have the domain expertise making cars, and we as a technology application providers, we have a role to play, and we have to bring in the user interface, the human touch, the whole customization, that I carry my personality through the cloud from my home, from my bedroom to the living room to the office to the car, without sacrificing or compromising. That's our role, and I think that's what we're showing. We're also showing, Caroline, here in professional implementation, working with IBM Watson, that how we can bring that technology in hospitals. So hospital, as a patient, we will free up the medical professionals' time and can access the basic information, all my test results from last week, all my visitation hours, I can reach out. So I think there's a lot of technology coming. So who wins? This is the consumer, and that's what I'm really focused on.
Who owns the data?
Who is the...
Owns the data. Will the car companies own the data? Will the technology giants own the data?
Oh, I see. I think, again, this is a convergence here. There's a lot of debate. Should Apple, should Google get into the car making? And frankly, we collaborate with Google and Apple, but we also compete. But we've taken a position now, especially with Samsung coming in, announcing the acquisition of Harman, that Samsung Harman will not get into car making. We'll partner with all the Germans. Today we're supporting very heavily BMWs and Daimlers and Audi, Toyotas, JLR, and here in GM, Ford, Chrysler. But our role is to really mature the technology and apply it, and keeping an eye on user interface, that technology is only as good as it's simple to use. That's what we are bringing to the market. So in the end, it's the convergence of car and application service providers like Harman.
How is the Samsung deal progressing? How's the integration?
I think integration has not started because that can only start once the deal is consummated. Right now, the process is happening. We believe by mid of this year, the transaction should close as the regulatory authorities are evaluating. And we will have a shareholder vote. But I'm actually very happy because I personally visited top 10, 15 investors one-on-one. They're very happy with 37% premium they got over 30 days average price. It's a great complementary deal for the customers and for the stakeholders. It's a very strategic.
Will you be making any more acquisitions? You recently made one yourself after being purchased by Samsung. Are you on the M&A trail yourself?
You know, I would say yes, because if you really want to be fast to the market, then you need to be alert and agile. Some things you do your own development organically, which we do, and same time, either you need to partner, collaborate, like we have announced Microsoft, IBM, Google, Apple, Samsung partnerships, or actually acquire. So speed to market. So yes, we will definitely make some unique technology acquisitions, especially in the area of active safety and sensor detection and technologies. We have the competence in cloud, we have the competence in data analytics, and we have the whole thing now with cybersecurity wrapped around.
Come tell us when you make those deals. Dinesh Paliwal, CEO of Harman, thank you for joining us live from CES. And tomorrow we continue our coverage from CES with IAC Chairman Barry Diller. That's at 3:30 in New York, 12:30 in San Francisco. And sticking with headlines out of CES, Hulu made an announcement regarding its live streaming platform. The company announced a pact with CBS, the most watched network in the United States. This is in addition to some 35 other channels participating in the live service, including ABC, Fox and TBS. The service is still set to launch in the next few months and will cost less than $40 a month. Meantime, AT&T unveiled its plans to speed up its network in CES. The company is set to test a 5G high-speed network by beaming DirecTV Now video to some homes in Texas. The company says it has reached speeds of up to 14 gigabytes a second and believes it may be fast, less expensive option to fiber optic cable. Now coming up, for the cheapest power on Earth, just keep looking to the sky. We'll explore how coal-powered energy could fall to solar next. This is Bloomberg.
The world of
Now, there's one asset we continue to watch. Bitcoin hitting an all-time high Wednesday, thanks to continued adoption in China and other parts of the world where traditional currencies are tightly controlled. The digital currency, which just turned 8 years old, reached a new high of $1,140. And coming up, we'll hear from former CIA Director Jim Woolsey. This after reports that former Indiana Senator Dan Coats is Trump's leading candidate of Director National Intelligence. Next, we're going to be now talking a little bit about solar, turning to the renewable energy. There seems to be a bright side to seeking the cheapest power on Earth. Solar power is now more affordable than coal in some parts of the world, and in less than a decade, it's likely to be the lowest cost option almost everywhere, as this chart shows. So can coal come back, or has solar, as it clearly shows on this chart, potentially won the war? Let's get to Bloomberg's Chris Martin, who covers renewable energy from New York. That chart, that picture told 1,000 words. The absolute slumping in the cost of producing solar energy. What's behind all of this?
Well, I think it surprised a lot of people. Most of it is improvements in technology, as well as looking at the subsidies that have helped the industry along. So they gained economies of scale, and that's really what it's about, just, improvements and expansion in production.
So clearly technology helping. We've got a great chart that's also along in your story showing how much the cost of solar farms has decreased. By 2025, we're looking at how much they're going to be producing dollars per kilowatt. Really is quite phenomenal, the sort of savings. I want to know which countries are leading the charge. I mean, I'm guessing it's the sunnier climes like the Middle East. Oh, yeah,
they certainly help because solar is much more cost-effective in sunnier climates. But it's true even in Germany. They led the way in solar expansion early on, willing to spend a little bit more so that they could advance the industry. So it's not going to matter within a decade. It's not going to matter whether you're a sunny country or even a somewhat rainy country. Even your home in England would probably be a good place for solar.
Really? Well, they are growing wine in England now. Nothing will amaze me. But, Chris, give us a sense of whether we'll see Donald Trump. We've heard so much talk about the resurgence of coal. Is all that talk? Can coal have any sort of resurgence?
He's fighting market conditions, and the fact is that coal is more expensive than a number of other energy technologies. More expensive than natural gas, more expensive than wind power, and certainly more expensive, about twice as expensive. If you look at the economics of building a new plant now, solar is half the cost of coal.
Now, what intrigued me about the first chart, yes, there is a plummeting in the cost of producing solar energy, but wind looks pretty cost-effective too. Will actually wind end up being the most efficient? And what happens when perhaps the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
Well, one thing that's valuable about the wind and solar combination is they're complementary. Wind generally blows stronger at night. Solar, obviously, better during the day. But I think you'll see both of them continue to expand. But, it's going to require, all kinds of energy because solar and wind don't always blow. You're going to need some generation that's there when the wind doesn't blow, and that's usually natural gas and nuclear, and less so coal plants.
So talking of nuclear, I was just coming over from Berlin, where they've been retrenching out of nuclear post of course, the terrible disaster that happened in Japan. Where does nuclear fit into all of this from a cost perspective, though?
Nuclear is a lot more expensive. It's even harder to gauge because there are so many cost overruns and they take so many years to build. One of the big advantages solar has over all other technologies is once you have the panels, you just drop them, on a roof or on the ground, and you can put up a plant in 6 months. A new coal plant takes years to develop. A new nuclear plant can take a decade, and solar, is so much less than that. You can just advance it to the point where you don't need to worry about the time so much.
Elon Musk certainly hoping so. Bloomberg's Chris Martin, great to have you on the show. Thank you. And to another story we're now watching. Alibaba continues to crack down on fake vendors, this time taking legal action against two sellers. It's suing the two parties for selling counterfeit Swarovski watches and is seeking $200 million in damages. This is all part of an aggressive plan to combat fake goods from popping up on the site. Alibaba reported it took down 380 million products listings and closed about 180,000 store platforms in the last 12 months. And a reminder, if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can now listen on Bloomberg Radio app and Bloomberg.com.
I'm Courtney Collins, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Luis Videgaray has been named Mexico's foreign minister. He resigned as finance minister in September after a visit by then presidential candidate Donald Trump. Trump posted a tweet calling him a brilliant finance minister and wonderful man. Britain's former ambassador to Brussels, Sir Thomas Barrow, has been appointed the UK's new ambassador to the European Union. He also served as the UK's envoy to Moscow. Barrow takes over for Ivan Rogers, who unexpectedly resigned yesterday. French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen says a protectionist economic policy would be good for employment in France. Le Pen pointed to President-elect Donald Trump's success pushing forward to keep jobs in the United States. She's looking to use his early successes as proof her own platform can deliver benefits. German police have searched 2 locations in Berlin linked to the man suspected of carrying out last month's deadly truck attack on a Christmas market. Investigators searched a refugee shelter and an apartment where men believed to have been acquainted with suspect Anis Amri once lived. And Russia and the Philippines are in discussions about increasing military cooperation. That's after repeated threats by President Rodrigo Duterte to scale back U.S. troop presence in the area. Russia says it's now ready to begin arming the Southeast Asian nation. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Courtney Collins. This is Bloomberg, and it's just after 5:30 p.m. Wednesday here in New York, 9:30 a.m. Thursday morning in Sydney. I'm joined by Bloomberg's David Fickling with a look at the markets. David, good morning.
Good morning, Courtney. And yes, pointing to a very slight up at the open in the New Zealand exchange today. Slightly more ambitious in Australia. Futures are pointing up about 0.5%, and in Japan up about 0.1%. We'll be watching the Chinese yuan today. Of course, it had one of its biggest jumps in a year yesterday, up to 6.87 to the greenback. Of course, there was a report from Bloomberg News saying that they were trying to prop up the yuan and look at ways of stemming capital outflows. We'll also be looking at Japan's big three car makers after those great results from car makers in the US overnight. All three of them significantly beat expectations. Nissan up 10%. So we'll be watching that, but also Korea's car makers, which Hyundai and Kia, which were a little bit weaker. That's what we're going to be looking at today. I'm David Fickling. Bloomberg Technology continues next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. Cyber threats and security are emerging as a major concern for 2017, and it comes to a head this week. Senator John McCain has scheduled a hearing on Thursday of the Armed Services Committee to tackle the issue of foreign cyber threats. But President-elect Trump continues to cast doubt about the investigation. He tweeted, "The intelligence briefing on so-called Russian hacking was delayed until Friday, perhaps more time needed to build a case." Meantime, Trump continues to weigh appointments related to national security. Former Indiana Senator Dan Coats is said to be Trump's leading candidate for Director of National Intelligence. Former CIA Director Jim Woolsey spoke to Bloomberg about how we should be focusing on the bigger picture as Trump's transitions into power.
This is a minor little blip. The intelligence business is full of controversy and arguments about assumptions and why did you do this, why did you issue that, then what do you mean by weapons of mass destruction, on and on. And this is a hiccup.
Respectfully, though, it seems like the president-elect is taking a different tone with the intelligence community than the acting president has, than previous presidents have. What's the relationship supposed to be like? What's it been like historically between the president and the intelligence community?
Well, the president ought to, by a few months, I think, into his administration, have been taught a good deal by the intelligence community about how things work. It takes a bit of time because some of these areas are fairly technically complex, but as you learn about them, you get to do a better job, I think, of understanding what we know and what we could draw conclusions from. So it's a kind of a older teacher student relationship, but the student is the president of the United States and the holder of the position that one might say is the most important and powerful in the world. So it's a different kind of relationship. The presidents, I've worked with 4 presidents, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and they've all been willing to hear out a different take on things. And I have no reason to believe that Donald Trump won't do the same. I think that it's important that the intelligence community help the new president and not kind of sit back there and kibitz and criticize.
Let me take your metaphor there about teaching. I've heard past presidents talk about the immediate reverence they have for those reports that they receive on a daily basis, those briefings, how awesome, for lack of a better word, it is to get all of that information. Again, playing out this metaphor further, is Donald Trump spending enough time in class? Are you satisfied he's being briefed enough?
Well, there's more than one way to run a class. You can have seminars, you can have lectures, you can have lots of things. And in the 2 years I was Director of Central Intelligence for President Bill Clinton, he never had a morning briefing. He didn't like to be briefed. He didn't like to have stuff read to him. He was a speed reader, is, I suppose, still a speed reader, and he liked to go through things quickly and then maybe ask some questions on the side, write a note in a book or a book of briefings. Jim, this fourth point seems to me to track what Kaplan has in his new book. Have you read it yet? Bill Clinton did things like that all the time, which was different than sitting there and taking the morning briefing. But that's the way he wanted to work. And however the President of the United States, in this case to be for the next 4 years anyway, Donald Trump, wants to have information presented to him, people need to accommodate him and not kind of sit back there and just kind of grumble about it to the press.
Let me return to that previous tweet, and let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say perhaps he was joking about the matter here. I wonder what you would say to somebody in the intelligence community who doesn't welcome this kind of skepticism from the president-elect, who wonders about the publicity associated with his or her job, who questions perhaps the president-elect's commitment to the intelligence community and the job that it does.
I'd say pull yourself together and get back to work or find a different job. Intelligence is important enough, tough enough, and from time to time angry enough that it's important not to get distracted by small matters. You got to call it straight. If somebody comes at you, whether it's a secretary of a cabinet secretary or vice president or even the president, national security advisor, and tries to push you off a point and you think you're right, you address it clearly. Here's why I think this is right. I believe, based just on the couple of meetings I've had with him, that Donald Trump is a fair-minded, balanced individual who talks rationally, quite reasonably about matters in small groups. I haven't, the only time I've seen him in a big group, like in front of thousands of people, is in an auditorium, and in that he is very bombastic and different kind of approach. But a lot of people said they thought that was worthless and it wasn't going to go anywhere, but it got him elected President of the United States and did not elect any of the people who were skeptical.
That was former CIA Director Jim Woolsey speaking earlier on Bloomberg Television. Meanwhile, President-elect Donald Trump is stepping up his criticism of the Intelligence Committee while bringing up a controversial figure to support his opinions. Trump tweeted that WikiLeaks' Julian Assange said a 14-year-old could have hacked Podesta. Why has DNC so careless? Also said Russians did not give him the info. End of quote. Now to a story we're following. Online publishing company Medium is cutting a third of its staff, announcing it's changing its business model. The company, started by Twitter co-founder Ev Williams, has relied on the same model as other media companies to make money, placing ads on articles. In a blog post Wednesday, Williams called that model broken. The job cuts mostly fall on the company's sales and business side. Now coming up, after months of anticipation, another glitzy unveiling from the electric car startup Faraday Future. But not all went smoothly on stage. We'll tell you why. This is Bloomberg. Ford and Toyota have formed a consortium with 4 other automakers in a move that's seen as preventing Apple and Google from controlling how drivers connect smartphones to their cars. Mazda, PSA Group, Fuji and Suzuki are also in the group. The goal of the partnership is to speed up development of the auto industry standards for in-vehicle apps and promote more choice in how smartphones integrate with dashboard displays and voice recognition. And staying with car tech, well, CES 2017 has brought us another glitzy unveiling from the much-hyped electric car startup Faraday Future. After showing off a concept car last year, the company came back with its first production model. It's called the FF91, and Faraday claims it can outpace a Tesla Model S in so-called ludicrous mode, claiming the crown of the world's fastest electric car, going from 0 to 60 in 2.39 seconds. Also, like Tesla, it's backed by an ambitious billionaire, the founder and CEO of the Chinese tech conglomerate Leeco. Joining us now for more is our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, and Bloomberg Technology's Selena Wang, who covers Leeco. Corey, to you first. I mean, a lot of craze here. That was, what is it, fastest, 12 sensors, facial recognition, but there was a bit of an embarrassment on stage when it comes to self-parking.
It doesn't self-park as you might expect, even a cheap Ford to do it these days. It's interesting to see how many companies are able to work in this kind of technologies. It is not Tesla's game alone. We tend to focus on Tesla, I think, in Silicon Valley so much because it's a Silicon Valley company. But in fact, the automakers from as startups like this or companies like Ford and many others, Audi, BMW, all working on a lot of these ideas. Porsche, interestingly, a lot of interesting work around electric cars. So this is Tesla might have pointed the way, but a lot of companies are coming very fast into this space.
Selena, the Chinese billionaire was there at the event. In fact, it was him where it was the slightly embarrassment made that the car didn't quite park. I think he called it a bit lazy that day. But tell us a little bit more about the billionaire behind this company.
So the billionaire behind it, Zhao Youting, he goes by YT. He's very well known in China. He's known for being very brash, very ambitious, sometimes too ambitious. He actually started out as the local IT guy at his tax bureau, and he's really made his fortunes in the publicly traded company Lesi, which is basically kind of like the Netflix of China. It's been growing very fast. But from there, he's quickly expanded into a slew of other businesses ranging from smartphones, VR headsets, TVs, movies, smart bikes, you name it, and he's expanded into it. But recently we're seeing that he may have expanded a bit too aggressively. He wrote in an internal memo to employees recently that they're moving too fast and they're having trouble raising cash. But again, he's a very brash, well-known person in China. He said things like Apple is a very slow innovator and we can outbeat Elon Musk and Tesla.
Outbeat another rather ambitious man who sets high targets, which is Elon Musk.
You pointed out the self-parking problem. When the Tesla Model X was first unveiled down in Los Angeles, Elon Musk couldn't get the trunk to open. And when they got another model where he's showing it off, he got out of the car and smacked his head when he was trying to show off how the headroom the car had. It showed how little it has. Now, he's a very tall guy. But nonetheless, these sort of live demos a la Steve Jobs are hard to pull off, and it's interesting. You see every CEO of every kind of industry now think they've got to go on the stage, quite often in blue jeans and a black turtleneck, and introduce their products as opposed to the ways that cars and other devices used to be released. One
thing I tend to find at tech conferences is the technology doesn't work, and certainly neither does the Wi-Fi. But Selena, talk to us about the money that has been put into this particular element, Faraday, when it comes to the billionaire. How much money is he winning? Is he losing? When do these things start to sell?
So, I mean, he put in $300 million of his own money into this. He has a very kind of unique way of financing his ventures. He basically pledges his shares in his publicly traded company and plows it into all of his ventures. We learned at CES that you can reserve this car for $5,000. It's unclear how much this is going to retail for when it comes out, apparently in 2018. I think that after last year's CES, there was a lot of skepticism around Faraday Future since they didn't release any functioning car. It was merely a concept car, and this year we got an actual functioning car, but we still have a lot of questions hanging in the air. Lots of skepticism around how are they going to make money. This is incredibly expensive to produce. It's unclear what the business plan is going to look like.
5,000 to order. It was only 1,000 when it came to a Tesla. Talk to us a little bit more today, Corey, about what's going on with Tesla, because it's not all about cars. We forget that it does have a gigafactory, and that's running and they've hit their deadline.
Well, we'll see what the actual production is out of that. Tesla has a history of not hitting its deadlines and missing its own estimates, as we've discussed. You know, it's also interesting, this production issue, right, which is going to happen to all these car makers. Production is hard. Tesla this quarter said that they had production problems. They couldn't get as many cars out as they want. They said that they had the same excuse for missing numbers in the first quarter. So these recurring problems about being able to produce as much as they thought they were and doing it successfully is really hard with this business that is the Model X and the Model S. Now, when they want to get to a much larger level of, they would have to more than double production this year and the next year, which they've been unable to do, in order to get the levels of Model 3 that they want to produce.
But the Gigafactory, today that's the news coming from Tesla, and the shares are popping. They're up more than 4%, even though we saw them fall after hours yesterday on the concerns of the car part of the business. Gigafactory up, running, they've hit their deadline.
The factory is running. How much they're producing, though, is a question mark. And we'll see what they actually produce over time and if there's any value there. And if there's demand for this product, right, where there are dozens and dozens and dozens of competitors who can hang a battery in your garage for an questionable use.
Selena, what do you think about some of the debate that's going on when it comes to CES, of course, of who wins, whether it's indeed the tech companies or it's the auto companies, but Faraday wants to own the data. I mean, what is the value in selling these cars? Is it all from what they make in terms of profitability on the actual car itself, or where does this billionaire's vision go?
Yeah, I want to talk about this in the context of Laco because they have a kind of a very unique vision. I had a chance to sit down with YT at their headquarters a few months ago, and he laid out this very broad vision of what he wants a consumer to experience. So imagine this. You have your Laco cell phone. You start watching a Laco movie on it. Then you may hail an autonomous Laco electric vehicle where you continue to watch that movie in the car. And then you exit the car, you finish where you left off, you watch it on a Laco, a VR headset, and then continue on a Laco smart TV. So as you can tell from this scenario, cars are a really integral part of this vision because YT sees a future of electric vehicles, of autonomous cars, and that car, that vehicle is another place to watch content. And let's remember that this company actually started as a software content maker, and all of these devices and hardware, cars, smartphones, you name it, is all just shells to hold all of their software. So in the context of YT, it's a very, very broad vision he has.
To own an ecosystem. Had that one before. Bloomberg Technology, Selena Wang, and our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Now, still ahead, it's one of the few companies whose name has become a verb. We're talking about Xerox. CEO Jeff Jacobson is next. This is Bloomberg. It's been a wild week for Xerox. Shares in the company have surged more than 20% in the last 2 days after it completed its spin-off of Conduent, its business services unit. Speaking earlier to Bloomberg Television, CEO Jeff Jacobson says, well, the company remains optimistic despite declines in its printing and hardware businesses. Take a listen.
What we've laid out for our investors, and we actually did it in the New York Stock Exchange last December 7th, just about a month ago, was we operate in an $85 billion market, and we've been the equipment sale revenue market leader for the past 7 years, so 28 consecutive quarters. You know, we're a company that's built on innovation. We still have 12,000 active patents. We're one of the top 20 patent-producing companies in the globe today. And what we're going to do is we're going to drive productivity. We're going to invest in the growth markets of that $85 billion market, and those growth markets are about a little less than half of the $85 billion, and they range anywhere from about 2% to about 15%. Sure. And we're going to couple that with the largest product launch in the history of Xerox.
Well, I want to know what that product launch is, but what are those, some of those growth markets, for example? Be more specific.
Yeah, so if I can, of our about $11 billion in revenue, about $3.5 billion is what we call document managed services. So if you think about it, we do business today with all of the largest corporate entities around the globe, government agencies, small, medium business market, graphic communications providers, and school systems as well. And the largest companies around the world, they don't want to worry about their print. What they want to worry about is what's core to their business and focus on their core competencies. Our core competencies are all about taking a document from creation all the way to communication. If they want to integrate and interface with the cloud in a secure manner, if they want to do mobile print, if they want to translate in 35 different languages, sure, those are the things we do.
Are you going to be expanding into different countries then?
So we already operate in about 160 countries. So I think the countries were well established. What it's all about now is how do we gain more share? Even though we are the market share leader around the globe today, there are still so many opportunities. Our market share is about 23%. So what I always tell my team, there's still 77% opportunity for us, even though we are the clear leader today.
So how do you anticipate the new administration impacting some of those relationships with some of those 130 plus countries?
Yeah, so obviously, being at the New York Stock Exchange today, I think the markets responded very positively to the new administration. You know, we're monitoring. What we expect to see is certainly regulatory reform, tax reform. What we're hopeful for is that where we operate as a U.S.-based company on a global basis, that we'll be able to do it on an equal playing field, and we believe this administration will do that.
Okay, what does that mean, though, in terms of equal playing field? There's a risk that some of our trade relationships might go sour. Where are you proactively sort of managing that kind of risk?
Yeah, so I mean, we don't think it'll be a significant risk at all from our standpoint. When I talked about equal playing field, it was more to make sure if there are tariffs in certain countries, that obviously the tariffs that we have a product coming into the U.S. versus going into a global entity, that they're on an equal playing field. You know, what we're focused on is how do we drive the innovation, how do we stay very close to our customers. What I'm a big believer in, this is a company, again, that's built on innovation, and if we have an energized sales force, we bring technology to the forefront of our customers, which we do each and every day, then that's a winning formula.
Mr. Jacobson, have you had any communication with the incoming administration about jobs? We know in the last several days there have been several announcements about jobs staying in the U.S. or coming back to the U.S. or being salvaged. Is that something you'd be looking to open, that kind of dialogue?
Yeah, I haven't had any personal interaction with the new administration, so at this point, no.
And would you be interested if there was to be some kind of an incentive in order to keep jobs here or move jobs back here or expand here as opposed to externally? Would you do that?
Oh, we'd always be open to listening to any incentives that would be good for our business and certainly good for our shareholders or customers.
Political at the end. That was Xerox CEO Jeff Jacobson speaking with Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn. And finally, Samsung has set up a $150 million venture capital fund, its first in the US. The new venture will make it easier for the South Korean tech giant to invest in early-stage startups. The fund, which has already made 6 investments, will be based in Mountain View, California. Now that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We'll continue our coverage of the CES with a great lineup of guests. AOL CEO Tim Armstrong, IAC Chairman Barry Diller, and HP Chief Technology Officer Shane Wall will be appearing on Bloomberg Television. Be sure to tune in to those interviews. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV. That's weekdays at 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco, and very early in the morning in Asia. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.
Studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Ian Bremmer is here. He is the president of the political risk consulting firm Eurasia Group. Every year, the firm publishes a list of top global political risks. It released this year's report this morning. It is called Top Risk 2017, the Geopolitical Recession. I'm pleased to have Ian Bremmer back at this table. Welcome.
Happy New Year, Charlie. Absolutely.
Good to see you.
You too.
I don't know if it's going to be a Happy New Year or not. What do you think? I mean, you talk about a global recession as we begin talking about risk.
We're here, so it's already half the battle. Look, you and I have been doing this for a bunch of years now, and I had the firm 20 years ago. We've never seen a geopolitical environment this unstable as the one we're now entering into in 2017. You have economic recessions every 7-8 years on average since World War II. Geopolitical recessions don't happen as often, but now the end of this old order, and the United States saying, look, we don't want not just to be the cop for the world, which has been coming for a long time, but we're not going to be the architect on trade. We're not going to promote our values globally. No one else is prepared to do that. And the election of Trump, the United States is now the driver of geopolitical uncertainty on the world stage. That's a new thing. That's not something we've been dealing with for decades.
Let's break down geopolitical recession. I mean, it means what specifically? I mean, you outlined some suggestions. U.S. is not playing the role it has played before, or at least if you believe the president-elect doesn't plan to play that role because voters don't seem to want it to play that role.
I think that's right. I think that it's a combination of both. I mean, voters have been less happy, less enthused with the idea of America taking lots of burdens on that its allies want or that multilateral institutions want for some time now.
Nation building everywhere but here.
Exactly. And Trump, I think, played that very well domestically and Hillary Clinton, frankly, did not. I mean, globalist was a dirty word. And at the Republican National Convention, when he got the nomination, he used that extremely effectively. It speaks well to the average American. But it's not just the United States, of course. We talk about geopolitical recession. We recognize that America's allies in Europe are weak and fragmented, facing enormous internal challenges. We recognize that the Middle East is in disarray, that Asia has stronger leaders. China, of course, is much more willing to provide leadership economically that challenges U.S. architecture and norms and values, but in no other way. The Russians are willing to do that in terms of security, but in no other way. And you put all of those things together, and then you elect President Trump. Come January 20th, I think we can say Pax Americana is over. We enter this geopolitical recession. And what's interesting about it is it's not going to be an enormous challenge for the United States at home. Right? I mean, the global economic recession 2008 affected everyone. There was enormous coupling of the global economies. Geopolitically, while Europe bleeds and while there's an arms race going on in Asia and while we have territorial disputes in lots of parts of the world and failed states, here in the United States we don't have that problem.
Well, President Obama has said to me and to others, when I'm around the world, they want America to lead. Now, is that no longer true, or is it that America doesn't want to lead?
Look, it's true, and it's good that Obama has come to recognize that after 8 years of the presidency, because, of course, a lot of those same leaders would look to Obama and say, you have not been leading, sir. And I do...
Is that only having to do with war in the Middle East, or does it have to do with global economic leadership?
It has to do clearly with global economic leadership, and there was a period of time after the 2008 recession when the Chinese suddenly said, the American model doesn't work anymore, we should move away from it.
We don't want to be that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But more than that, it's also about American values. I mean, you go and talk to leaders in Asia who desperately say they want the United States, and part of that is they believe that the United States created these multilateral institutions like the UN, like the IMF, like the World Bank, like Bretton Woods on currency. They want the Americans upholding those standards, the Americans and allies. And, Trump saying, I'd much rather work with Putin, who's a strong man and can get it done, and the values inside that country doesn't necessarily matter, that is unnerving to American allies. And it's hard to put your finger on that, right? That soft power, that leading by example, but it is important.
But when you say that, I would ask, is he different from a lot of other American leaders? I mean, they didn't ask those questions when they were making nuclear agreements. They didn't ask about, what are you doing about this minority group in your country or this other minority group? They said, how can we make a nuclear agreement that's in both of our national interest?
I think that...
They weren't stressing American values. They were stressing America's security.
No, and Kissinger, of course, is sort of one extreme side of that, and you could argue that Jimmy Carter is perhaps the other. And usually, American
others are more like Kissinger than Jimmy Carter.
That's true. That's true. But America still has been promoting, for example, a free media. America has been promoting free markets globally.
Rule of law.
Rule of law. And I think we can make pretty clear that Trump's inclinations are that the American presidency has been diminished because American corporations are not acting in a patriotic manner. And American media is not acting in a patriotic manner. And he thinks that the American presidency would do a lot better, and we'd have a much stronger negotiating position vis-a-vis other countries if they were to back up the Americans and not act like a bunch of globalists or globalizers. And that's a very interesting change.
Do you think the Obama presidency in world affairs was a successful presidency?
No.
No.
No. And it really saddens me to say that, because this is a guy that clearly wanted the best, right? I mean, you have to argue, you look at the way he's comported himself in the presidency. You look at the values that he has lived up to himself, the way he has tried to lead by example with his family, with his friends, with his White House. You want this guy to be able to succeed. And yet, when you look at the Obama administration's balance sheet internationally, where they've succeeded and where they've failed, they've got this limited Iran deal in their favor. They've got a Cuba opening that was way overdue. You've got some good symbolism with Hiroshima and Pearl Harbor between the U.S. and Japan. But aside from that, the transatlantic relationship is worse than it's been really since the end of World War II. The Russia relationship, in my view, is an abject failure, which makes it harder to criticize Trump despite the fact that...
Putin says that, too.
Absolutely. And it's hard to criticize Trump on the hacks, which I'm sure we'll get into, precisely because Obama has been so ineffectual at dealing with the Russians on a bunch of issues.
Why is that?
Why has he been ineffectual? Well, look, I think on the one hand, he does want to talk the strong principles and values, but there needs to be a recognition that if you don't actually care that much, or if your allies aren't really going to be with you, you can't necessarily accomplish the things you want. I think that Obama's had an administration where he thinks he's on the 20-yard line, he's ready to kick a field goal, you recognize you've been pushed back to the 25, the 30, the 45, the 50. At some point, you got to bring the kicking team on, you got to kick a punt, play the long game.
Okay, where are there cases where the Europeans were not with Obama, Obama was not with them?
Well, you certainly look at Syria.
Well, okay, but except for Syria.
Look at Ukraine.
I'm thinking about, in terms of dealing with Russia.
Yes, I would say on both of those. On Ukraine, there's no question that the ability of the United States to get strong and firm measures against the Russians and sanctions was like pulling teeth. The support from the Europeans to actually help build Ukraine as an economy to make them sustainable was virtually zero. Germany absolutely wasn't there. The desire of the Europeans to work with Russia on energy, of course, half of them were looking to ensure that. They were the ones that took the economic hit.
So was that a failure of Obama's leadership?
Well, I think it's a failure of Obama to recognize that if the constellation of interests you have to play with don't line up to getting the Russians out of Ukraine or making Ukraine a functional independent country, that you're probably going to have to change your policy. And I think that was true on Syria, and I think that's been true in handling the hacks as well. I think Obama made a big mistake in handling the hacks, to be honest with you.
In what way?
In the sense that if he truly believed that this was a threat to American national security, and he said that he does, and that it was delegitimizing the U.S. election, he said that was true as well, then you hit the Russians hard and definitively when it's going on. You don't tell them to cut it off.
Sooner rather than later.
Sooner rather than later. He said the reason he didn't do it is because he didn't want to be perceived in the United States. He didn't want to be perceived in the United States as being partisan and supporting Hillary. And I say, Mr. President, with all due respect, and I have a lot of respect for this man, you're the president. And perceptions of being perceived as partisan is a lot less important than ensuring the national security of the country that you run. And that's not leadership.
I think he also feared a Russian reaction that would spiral into something before the election, too.
He did fear that, and yet, Right? He was, as a consequence, unable to respond to a clear and direct threat to an American institution that we all hold as incredibly important.
When President-elect Trump talks about Putin, what is it you think is at heart in that relationship, or at core?
So we can focus. There are a lot of things we can focus on. First, easy to score some points. If you're trying to put points on the board, in the same way that Abe comes over and gives you a golf club, easy to say, look, he respects me. Easy for Trump to say, look, Barack says Assad must go. We know that's foolish. He's still there. Obama's the one going. I can work with these Russians. We'll together fight ISIS. Easy for Trump to put some points on the board there. Easy for Trump to say Crimea was Russian before, it's Russian now, let him recognize it. Easy for Trump to do that. He sees that the Europeans are moving away from sanctions, easy to normalize that. Now, there's also the issue that Trump does not support American exceptionalism. And this is a real bane for Putin as well. So the idea that there is a transactional foreign policy that occurs between two adults that are strong men that can do business together is one that's attractive to Trump. It's one that's attractive to Putin. But when I add up all of that, that doesn't quite get me to the level, the effusive level of consistent support that America First Trump seems to be promoting for Putin.
Trump doesn't believe in American exceptionalism, you said?
Trump clearly has said that we should not be promoting American democracy and trying to export it abroad. He says that we look like hypocrites and it doesn't do us any good and it allows other countries to take advantage.
I mean, that's not a unique position to Donald Trump. A lot of people have said, look, it's not wise for us to go to a country and say that they should accept America's version of democracy.
Right.
They have a different culture, they have a different system, they have a different evolution. You know, we can't therefore go in and to Iraq after it collapses and say, we're going to impose an American political system on you.
True,
they won't accept it.
But Putin looks at Obama. Putin looks at Obama. He looks at Hillary, and he said, "These are people who fundamentally believe that their system is better than mine, and they are willing to try to delegitimize me as a consequence." He absolutely believes that, and he sees Trump as someone that will not do that.
What should Obama have done other than simply retaliate in kind? Which Putin already believed they were doing.
Yeah, I think that there would have had to be strong responses that were at the time. They weren't just about sanctions. They would have had to include direct cyber attacks as well. And
so what would we have attacked and what would have been their retaliation?
There was a series of recommendations that were made to the president by intelligence, by CIA about these are the options that are in front of you, and he chose not to take them because he thought they were dangerous. I'm not privy to what those targets would have been, and if I were, I certainly wouldn't be able to talk about them.
The idea was that they might have been the economic interest of Vladimir Putin.
Could have been made transparent,
might be embarrassing to him, for example.
Or they could have frozen a bunch of assets, which we certainly have the ability to do. They could have stopped banking a lot of people.
Some of these things they did that we don't know. That's the argument made by some. You know, they're not telling us everything that they did in retaliation.
I'm sure that's true. But if you look at what they are telling us and what they did, one assumes that there's some level of commensurateness with those two things. What they actually have done publicly is extremely weak tea and very late, 3 weeks before Trump comes in, and Putin can then look magnanimous and say, I'm not even going to pay attention because you're irrelevant. I'll work with my boy Donald.
So 2016, in your judgment, was a very successful year for Vladimir Putin.
I do agree. I do agree.
He came out of the Middle East and out of Syria as an power player.
Yes.
And the person who empowered Bashar al-Assad, who is now on the winning side, who's now eradicating rebel forces wherever he can find them, first in Aleppo and now surrounding Damascus.
Look, Assad must go, it turns out Obama must go, right? I mean, how many people would have expected that 5 years ago?
When Obama leaves power, Assad's still in power.
That's right.
Because of Vladimir Putin.
Because of Vladimir Putin, primarily because of Vladimir Putin.
And then Vladimir Putin, along with Russia, along with Iran and Turkey, gets credit for...
They're the ones that are putting an end to the war. They're the ones that are coordinating the ceasefire. And there are very few rebels to speak of at this point. Clearly, ISIS has had territory taken away from them, and that's a positive thing. But if you look at 2016, you want to see who really was the man of the year. It's this guy running an economy that's not doing particularly well, with an educational system that's kind of falling apart, not a global power anymore. Former Soviet Union fell apart, yet Putin, with that hand, has still been able to run circles around other countries.
And the largest nuclear force in the world.
That's right. Number one, U.S. number two.
China. Well, before I go to China, tell me where war is most likely to break out.
I'll tell you something that worries me, which is, and this is about this geopolitical recession concept, which is that, you know, sitting across the table from you over the past years, if you had asked me, Ian, do you think there's any real possibility of a serious war between major countries, I would have said nothing proximate. I look at 2017, and I can no longer say it's impossible. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's possible.
Where is it possible?
I think it is possible that because of the profound lack of trust between the major countries in the world, accidents can escalate to a greater degree. So the possibility of an armed confrontation over North Korea is now, I think, possible.
So lay out the scenario for an armed confrontation over North Korea.
So Trump tweets today.
Yes.
That
it's not going to happen, that they're going to have long-range missiles that can deliver nuclear warheads to the continental America.
In other words, Trump, even before he becomes a president, decides he's going to set his own red line. Right? Now, we know that red lines have gotten us in trouble before, particularly over North Korea, and a bunch of administrations have been hoisted on that. So maybe he just says this and he fails. But what if he means it? What if he means that they're not going to develop, that they're going to be stopped from this ICBMs?
In the same way that President Obama said they would not tolerate Iran having nuclear weapons.
For example. Or that they said that, you know, the chemical weapons would not be tolerated in Syria, and all these things.
Well, they got rid of the chemical weapons.
They did. They did. Point being that the ability to prevent North Korea from continuing to develop this program is something the United States has extremely limited capability to ensure. We can get the Chinese to engage with us on some multilateral sanctions, and they've been incredibly ineffective at getting the North Koreans to the table. So either Trump is going to have a much better relationship with China than heretofore he has shown an inclination to have, and he's going to get them on board, and we're going to say, let's come up with some, you know, sort of creative diplomacy, some carrots and some sticks, recognizing they've got 20 nuclear weapons, recognizing they've got an ICBM program, and what can we give them to work with us? Thus far, that seems unlikely. Right? Or he's going to have to take a hard line. And a hard line is what? He's going to militarily attack North Korea? A hard line is what? He's going to sanction the Chinese because they're not cutting off the North Koreans? That has the ability to get the North Koreans really agitated. And you could imagine that the North Koreans would engage militarily in their backyard and create accidents.
So what if the U.S. would take out their whatever nuclear facilities they have? Take them out militarily.
Right.
What would happen?
Maybe nothing, right?
I mean, wouldn't the rest of the world applaud?
A lot of the world would applaud. I think let's see where the South Koreans are at that point, right? We've got a South Korean president that is going to be forced out, and she's quite likely going to be replaced in quick elections with the opposition in South Korea. That opposition would be aligned with the Chinese, not with the United States. They'd probably toss out the idea of this THAAD missile defense system that the Americans worked out with President Park. South Koreans suddenly going to be working more closely with the North Koreans. Japan's going to feel very isolated. China is going to feel like Trump is pushing in an extremely volatile way. It is the number of countries that are applauding the United States, even when we do a good thing, is reducing. Because countries aren't as convinced that the United States is there for them over the long term. But still, Obama's right that when you look around the world, there still are an awful lot of countries that would really like to see more U.S. You ask if they think they're going to get it under a Trump administration, the answer for most of them is no.
For most of them?
For most of them.
In the Middle East, that includes the Sunni countries.
I think, so I was just there, and I met with a lot of leaders in the region, and I think that the Gulf Arabs they had such a hard time with Obama, and they like the fact that Trump is going after Iran, and Israel's not as relevant for them as it used to be, so the Netanyahu relationship they don't really care much about with Trump. They're kind of hopeful, especially with Tillerson as Secretary of State nominee, that Trump's a businessman. He wants to fight terrorism. Great, those countries want to fight terrorism. He can work with strongmen authoritarians. He's not going to criticize them on human rights. Maybe Trump is okay for them. At this point, they don't know any of the Trump people, but they're cautiously hopeful. But the Europeans are not. The Asians are not. The Chinese certainly are not. So if you ask me to sort of take a temperature of the room around the world of do people generally get unnerved or a little bit excited about Trump coming on as president, it largely tilts to the former.
They get unnerved.
They get unnerved.
Because he's unpredictable.
Because he's unpredictable and because they think he's going to be less of a friend. America first looks like Mexico second, right? As
well, but I mean, there's also those people, and I was looking at a piece that Jerry Seib wrote today, and, you know, called the method in Trump's messaging habits, you know, that everything is simply an initial offer, and that everybody knows that he's simply playing to what his instinct is as a real estate developer, which is that, you know, you come in with a much larger demand than you expect to get. It's all negotiation.
Sure. And I do think that there will be deals that will get done. But, you know, if you're Mexico today looking at Ford closing a $1.7 billion plant in Mexico because Trump's telling U.S. corporations to become patriotic, that's very zero-sum. If you're China and you're seeing Trump talking about your opening negotiating position may be way off the reservation.
What's wrong with asking a country asking your businesses to be patriotic? What's wrong with that?
There may be nothing wrong with it. We've been focusing on the rest of the world. If we were focusing this conversation on the United States and American workers, I mean, clearly, even before becoming president, Trump has shown that he's willing to use the bully pulpit that he's going to have to force American corporations to pay more attention to American jobs. That is clearly a useful thing. And if he adds to that some infrastructure spending, that'd be a great thing for the U.S. But you can't ask me, do other countries think that's good?
Why don't they do this? Don't other countries do the same thing? Isn't every leader committed to drive the best thing he can for his own economy and for his own people? Isn't that what being elected leader is about?
Well, free market capitalism, as the Americans have experienced it, has historically been about creating a global market that is as efficient as possible. We have the biggest companies in the world. Therefore, we want to have access to all of those markets. And we want to let those corporations invest wherever they see fit to maximize profitability. Now, if Trump is saying, you know what, that's fine, but these companies aren't really American. They're global companies. We see corporate inversions where a big pharmaceutical company in the U.S. will actually go and headquarter itself in the UK or Ireland for tax reasons, that I'm going to hit them hard. Now, when he says that, you, the American corporations, should be patriotic, you know what? Chinese corporations are very patriotic. Now, the question is, will Trump be successful? And we hope he will be. We do have to recognize that the number of jobs that were created by Ford's announcement was 700. The number of jobs closed in Mexico is 1,800. Most of the jobs that leave the United States now are not going to other countries. They're going to machines. And Trump can build walls, but they don't keep AI from advancing. They're not going to take drivers' jobs back. And one of the things I do worry about is whether Trump is going to start going after Silicon Valley in a much harder way. Right. Is he going to start saying, Uber, you're evil because you're taking away all of these jobs, and I'm not going to allow you to create a system where American...
And because the idea of retraining somehow rings hollow now to many people.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you can absolutely force a company or 5 or 50 to open, to provide some more jobs, get some tax credits, and invest in the United States. And the U.S. is not a bad bet. If labor doesn't matter as much to productivity, then you shouldn't be producing as much in China, right? Because China's much more uncertain. You've got to pay to have things shipped. The U.S. is going to get some of that, but there's not going to be many jobs with that.
Talk a bit about Xi Jinping. I mean, he's got... he wants to, it is said and rumored, that he'd like to serve a longer term. He'd like to have another term.
It is said and rumored. He has not said or rumored that himself.
Exactly right.
Yes.
But it is said.
It is said.
Yes. And clearly he wants to be positioned as a very strong and great Chinese leader.
Yeah, sure.
He is. And he wants the perception of the Chinese people to believe that.
Right.
Yes. And that he believes in peace and prosperity.
Right.
And that yet he's a strong nationalist as well. All of that.
But this is the big year for him.
Exactly. So having all those factors at play, how does he behave?
I think that one of the most dangerous things globally about the Trump presidency, with his volatility, with his, opening gambit, but then let's see where we get, but I'm going to bluster and I'll say whatever I want and I'll rip up the script, is that this is a bad year to do that with the Chinese, because of their party Congress and their leadership change coming up. Right. This is the year that Xi Jinping cannot be seen domestically to look weak at all. And his willingness to overreact to a Trump administration that's seen as playing games on Taiwan, on South China Sea, on North Korea, on tax, is potentially quite dangerous.
Talk a minute about, speaking of 2017, Angela Merkel.
Yeah.
Weaker. Might not win.
Will win.
Will win.
I know I shouldn't say things like that anymore, right? Because,
sometimes they're not true.
Sometimes they're not true. No, look, I mean, I certainly didn't think that Trump was going to win, and most of us didn't. But in the case of Germany, unlike in France, where Le Pen really could win French elections, in Germany, you just don't have the problems with the middle class and the working class, because the EU works for the Germans. Right? You have the identity problems, the refugee issues, the security issues, but not the economic issues. So you can't have opposition to Merkel saying, I'm going to give you a vastly better economic deal. So Merkel gets a fourth term, but it's going to be with a weaker coalition, a more fragmented coalition. And the one thing that you and I have been able to count on out of Europe since the 2008 financial crisis, no matter what kind of pickle these countries get themselves into, Merkel is a strong leader that can respond. She can respond to Brexit. She can lead that response. She can respond to the Greek crisis. She can respond to Spain, to Portugal, to Cyprus, you name it. Now we're looking at 2017. There are just as many crises that are coming in Europe as there was in 2016. Right? You haven't resolved the refugee issue, the terrorist problems. The French elections are going to be really big, a weaker Italian government. And Merkel's not going to be able to respond the way she had before. And the U.S.-German relationship is also much more challenged now than it was when you were dealing with Obama. So I think that Europe looks particularly vulnerable because they haven't fixed any of the structural issues, economic, political, or social, that confront them, and yet they no longer have the leadership to at least kick the can down the road.
Let's talk about back here domestically, the White House versus Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw Trump invite all the Silicon Valley in, and many of them came.
Most of them came.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you see in terms of 2017?
It would have been shocking if a president-elect had invited a bunch of American CEOs of any stripe and they had chosen not to come. So, I mean, I take at face value that they invite, they show up, they have a photo up, that's great. But unlike Carrier and Boeing and Ford, which are corporations that, I think there are deals that are fairly easy for them to do with the White House that make both look good. That say, we're committed to America, you're committed to America, great. Silicon Valley is going to be much harder, and for a few reasons, right? One is that none of those guys supported Trump, with the exception of Peter Thiel, right? I mean, this was libertarian Silicon Valley. He got just completely trounced in California. He does remember that. More importantly, they're the ones that run social media. They're the ones that run the algorithms, the searches. It's Amazon and Google and Facebook. Bezos is the one that owns the Washington Post. There's going to be a real fight over information and media space that Trump feels he needs to control, and his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, feels they need to control. Silicon Valley will be on the opposite side of that. That's going to be a problem. Then you have the issue that on security, Trump is going to take a much more intrusive perspective, as you've seen with his new CIA director appointment and many others, Mr. Pompeo.
Kind of law and order perspective.
Much more we need to have access to this data, and we need to be intrusive in these organizations, and that's going to be a problem for the corporates in Silicon Valley, too. Add to that the discussion you and I just had about jobs, and that Silicon Valley is the one part of the U.S. economy that's just knocking the cover off the ball, but that's all about trying to find ways to do great and efficient work without people. You can see how the single most important driver of U.S. and global economic growth is suddenly really on the wrong side of President Trump. And I do wonder how many of those companies are going to say, you know what, being based in the U.S., maybe we're not sure we want to be doing as much of that under this guy. And we're not sure how we can come to a modus vivendi with this guy. I think this is going to be a big fight.
You really think so?
I do.
Do you think that people like those major companies with some of the highest market cap in American business are going to say, we're just going to move outside the country?
I think that they're going to see that it's going to be very hard for them to align their fundamental interests with what Trump is going to be demanding. And some of them will end up sucking it up and dealing. Some of them will spin off some parts of their company that are particularly problematic, and they'll sell them for big money. They'll do more in the United States. They need the education, but they need the H-1Bs, too. They need the visas. And that's another place where Trump is not showing a lot of inclination, at least early, to be really supportive.
What is it about Trump that you think worries most people? Is it simply that he seems to be playing by different rules and different assumptions than everybody else has played in the past?
I come at this with the perspective that Trump is my president. I come at this with the perspective that I want him to succeed and we need him to succeed. But I also wonder, to the extent that he fails, is he likely to fail more because he is incompetent, more because he is corrupt, or more because he is authoritarian? And I will tell you that the first two of those things don't bother me very much. The third one does. Incompetent. If it turns out that he fails because he's incompetent, the system can deal with that, and you'll have smart people and smart institutions around and decentralization.
Well, around him already.
Some.
So it's not competence. It's not corruption.
It's not corruption. It's if there's something that worries me, it's if he fails because he's an authoritarian personality. In other words, if what Trump really is driven by is the acquisition of power at the expense of others. And if he fails in that way, particularly if the U.S. has a crisis and he starts becoming more unpopular, he isn't seen as doing well. He goes down to the 20s and he's getting hit on all sides and he refuses to take it. And you have a crisis. The ability of the U.S. executive to respond to a crisis, to do things that could actually truly undermine the long-term sustainability of democratic American institutions is real.
So the scenario is what?
The scenario is, so you think about the 2008 financial crisis and how we were able, the U.S. president, two U.S. presidents were able to basically cut checks for over $1 trillion without really any congressional oversight. Or look at after 9/11 and the wars we got into, the Patriot Act and all the rest. So the scenario is, if it turns out that Trump's downside is not incompetence or corruption, but his authoritarian tendencies, if that is true, then the thing that would worry me is in response to a crisis, that authoritarian inclination really damages our democracy long term. That would be my concern.
So he loses any sense of paying attention to democracy and the democratic values that this country has been founded on.
That he sees he said that Putin's a stronger leader than Obama. He said that. And he said it in a way that, of course, that's true. We know that's true.
But he said that in terms of, I mean, as I remember it, he said that he's a stronger leader for Russia than Obama is.
Yeah, there's no question. And
I mean, he wasn't recommending a Putin for the United States.
No, he was not.
He clearly wasn't. I mean, he basically, for Russia, he's a stronger leader.
But if you look at, so again, I don't think we know enough yet to know which of those three
whether he has
is
authoritarian
the actual
tendencies.
downside. Yeah, we don't. We don't actually know. We know a lot of showmanship, but we don't really know what his weakness is. Turns out that I think Obama's weakness was resolve and leadership when risks needed to be taken. This is, I mean, Obama's a guy that clearly has no problems accepting facts. Trump doesn't like accepting facts, right? Obama accepts facts.
Concerns you that he listens and he says, you know, I don't believe that American intelligence is right when they say that the Russians were hacking in the United States.
And so when that happens, when it turns out that Trump is not accepting facts, is that happening because of lack of competence? Is it happening because he has a different set of interests that support Trump and his family and his corporation? Or is it because he actually wants to accumulate more power? And I think we don't know the answer to that. Okay, we all want him to succeed, but we do have to recognize that there's downside.
Or he has some reason for not wanting the facts to be real.
For example, yeah. So that's the thing that worries me the most as we have a couple weeks left before we get into a very different environment with our president.
Thank you for coming.
Charlie, great to see you.
Thank you. Ian Bremmer, the risk for 2017. Back in a moment. Stay with us. Megyn Kelly, the anchor at Fox News, announced today that she was leaving the network after more than a dozen years. She will take a prominent role at NBC News. Kelly has been the host of Fox's second most watched program, The Kelly File. Her national profile grew rapidly during the presidential campaign after a feud with Donald Trump that began at the first Republican primary debate in August 2015. Trump criticized Kelly for asking him about his attitude toward women.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
No, it wasn't. Your Twitter account...
Thank you.
For the record, it was well beyond Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
Joining me now is Brian Stelter. He is a senior media correspondent for CNN. He is the host of Reliable Sources. Before that, he was at the New York Times. I'm pleased to have him back at this table. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me how big a story this is for you and for the media, because you cover the media.
The TV insiders, it's one of the biggest deals of the decade. You know, for over a year, for over a decade. Why? Because as you know, she's one of the rising stars on television, one of the rising stars in media, and we saw that so vividly during the U.S. presidential election. Right. First at that very first debate, and then all throughout the campaign as Trump waged a campaign against her. Kelly Starr was rising and rising and rising. Yes, she's controversial, but she's clearly a breakout within this television news orbit. And so to see her leave, and not just leave, but go to NBC, which many people were not expecting, was really a bombshell today, and I think it says a lot about where TV is right now.
What does it say about where TV is right now?
Well, we're going through what we all know is a media revolution, and yet it's actually not happening as quickly as you might expect. These changes in television are gradual. There's still room for apparently a $15 million deal, or maybe even a $20 million deal the way we saw today. There's still millions and millions and millions of people that want to turn on their TV and watch Megyn Kelly, to watch Charlie Rose, if I may say, to watch these programs every day. You might have thought 10 years ago that these were going to change everything, and they are. Mobile phones are changing everything, but not so quickly. And so then Megyn Kelly clearly looking at the landscape, deciding she needed to leave Fox, she wanted to leave Fox, but wanted to go to a big network with a lot of opportunities to reach many millions of people, and that's NBC.
What does it mean for Fox?
That's the big question that I don't have an answer to yet. You know, because you look at Fox, they have not named a replacement for her today. They seem a little bit caught off guard that she's actually leaving. They say she's only going to stay through the end of the week. And now they have to decide.
At the end of the week, she's out of there.
On Friday, yeah. There was a question for a couple hours, was she ever going to be back on the air at all? Turns out she's going to be on for a few more days, and that's it. You know, you can understand why. If someone's moving out, you want them to move out as soon as possible. But for Fox, they do stand at a crossroads of sorts. Megyn Kelly was the closest thing to a Trump critic or a Trump antagonist on Fox. Now, all of a sudden, she'll be gone. Will Fox lean even more heavily toward the pro-Trump network? Will their identity as a conservative cable news channel become even more clear now? Or will they surprise us with someone we're not expecting in the 9 p.m. hour?
It is said that the Rupert Murdoch's sons, Lachlan and James, very much wanted her to stay because they wanted her to represent the future of Fox.
Right. That's right. And this was a clear disappointment for all of the Murdochs. Lachlan Murdoch received a call from her this morning, Megyn Kelly talking about her decision. I was told it was a cordial conversation, but then very quickly NBC made its triumphant announcement. NBC thinks they are making a big investment in the future. You know, she's going to have a daytime show, she's going to have a primetime show on Sunday nights, and then she'll be a part of special event coverage. Where that leaves Fox, you know, we shall see.
Especially coming, as I said, it's been a tumultuous year because of the huge footprint that Roger Ailes had.
But I also say
then
Fox
having to resign because he built this powerhouse, this juggernaut in cable news.
And of course, Megyn Kelly, one of the women who came forward alleging harassment by Ailes. The Murdochs supported her, removed Ailes, pressured him to resign. Fox has not skipped a beat in the 6 months since. If you thought the Roger Ailes leaving was going to be the downfall of Fox News, absolutely not. The ratings are very strong right now, especially as it is a pro-Trump network in most cases. And I would expect it'll continue to be that.
I should say that in terms of their reporters, I mean, they've got a lot of political reporters who play it straight.
They have real journalists.
I mean,
yes, yes.
Guys who are in the business of opinions rather than reporting the news. or separate?
I like to call it I like to say Fox is two things. It is a journalism operation. Yeah. It's also a political operation. Right. It is both things, and its core identity is conservative. But you're right. Then there are important and really impressive reporters there as well. Megyn Kelly, she felt that it was not. One of them. It was not the right place for her anymore, though. She did not always feel supported at Fox. There was always not always. There was occasionally sniping from her 8 p.m. host, Bill O'Reilly, and once in a while the 10 p.m. host, Sean Hannity. So it makes sense for her to try to set up a new perch, but this is also a very big risk for her. We don't see these deals happen very often. Talent like Megyn Kelly leaving for another network. And when we do see it, sometimes doesn't end up working very well.
Well, the last time that I can remember this happening, I'm not sure, actually. I mean, I think the last time this kind of was so amazing was when Dan Rather was about ready to go either to Roone Arledge to work for ABC News, and instead Walter Cronkite resigned so he could assume the chair at CBS.
I think about Katie Couric in 2006
exactly.
Also.
Leaving from the
Katie
Today
Couric
Show
is an interesting case because she was at NBC. She goes to CBS. She anchors for several years. The view is that it was not a complete success. She goes off and does a daytime talk show, not a complete success. Now is at Yahoo. That could be a cautionary tale for Megyn Kelly, but the media world's changing every year as well. I don't know where we're going to be in 10 years. Maybe in 10 years, Megyn Kelly's anchoring the Nightly News or the Today Show. But for now, this daytime show is interesting. Charlie, she told you about a year ago, last April, she told you her dream job would be a little bit of Charlie Rose, a little bit of Oprah, and a little bit of me. And that's what she says she'll be doing now. That's what she has told people, around her advisors over the Christmas holiday when she was trying to figure out what decision to make. She concluded this NBC offer was the best way to get to that dream job of this newscast where she can show some of herself, do hard-hitting interviews, have panel discussions, and be free from the Fox orbit. There will also be this primetime Sunday night program.
Okay, let me talk about that
I would
first.
expect that in the fall also.
What's that?
That is a news magazine style program, maybe a little bit like what Brian Williams tried to do 5 years ago. He had a program called Rock Center on Sunday nights.
It was a magazine show, essentially, wasn't it?
And it didn't last more than a couple of years. It was a magazine show, a lot like 60 Minutes. This you would expect to be molded more around Megyn Kelly. And she has the backing, the support of her boss, her new boss, Andy Lack, the head of NBC News, who created West 57th Street, the news magazine, decades ago. Lack very much has a broadcast sensibility, so there's a lot of logic to him in this deal. Of course, she might be going up against 60 Minutes or going up against a lot of other compelling Sunday night programming. You think about even all the dramas on cable these days. It is a very competitive landscape. And for her to break through is going to be a tremendous challenge. We're a couple of weeks away from a new president. Right. I was listening to Ian Bremmer with you a few minutes ago, talking about the prospects for authoritarian behaviors from this new president. The landscape for the country is very uncertain, and the landscape for journalism is very uncertain right now. A lot of journalists downright fearful about what's to come from this administration. Megyn Kelly, of course, is a visible manifestation of what Trump can do to journalists, attacking her by name, retweeting people calling her ugly words.
It was painful
that
for
kind
her,
of thing.
But did it hurt her?
Did it hurt her? It hurt her among some of the core Fox News viewers who now say they've had enough of her. They don't want to see her. They're glad she's leaving Fox. How many of them are there? There's not a lot, but those voices are very loud. It hurt her among that Trump-loyal fan base that turns against whoever Trump tells them to turn against. But it didn't hurt her among the broader public.
Now, you have a television program on CNN.
Yes.
Reliable sources.
11 a.m. Eastern Time, if I may say.
Yeah. Yes. At the same time, you do a whole lot of social media stuff. I mean, it seems to me the two have been connected.
I was talking to a colleague this week who said, this is now a cable news presidency. It's also a social media presidency. What it really is a cable social media presidency. That's what Donald Trump is doing. It's what we're going to see in a couple of weeks when he takes over in Washington. And I think that's what we're seeing from television hosts, from journalists increasingly as well.
Because they have a strong social media presence.
That combination. I was talking to Josh Earnest about this, the outgoing White House press secretary. His point was, journalists, politicians, we're not so different, you and I. We're not so different right now. On both sides, there are the same challenges, trying to figure out new forms of distribution, new ways to reach an audience that feels real and authentic. You can love or hate Donald Trump's tweets, but he knows what he's doing with that device.
What is it that, when you talk to reporters and journalists who are pondering this question now, what is their relationship going to be with the Trump administration? What are the questions that they're raising? What fears do they have?
if we're being honest, what I hear over and over again is how bad will it really be? It can be very bad. And what I mean by bad is blacklisting reporters from the White House press briefing room, the way Trump did during the campaign. What I mean by bad is audits of journalists through the IRS. What I mean by bad is using the Espionage Act to subpoena journalists, to hold them and charge them with crimes for using information from anonymous sources about intelligence stories. David Sanger of the New York Times, a great example of someone who uses anonymous sources inside the intelligence agencies to tell us what's going on, what our government's doing for us. It is those kinds of investigative journalists who have very deep-seated fears about what the Trump administration could do. Now, the Obama administration's record is not stellar on this either.
There was a story over the weekend about that very point.
Absolutely.
The point in terms of tracing down sources.
Yes, that particular issue, James Risen as an example, James Rosen at Fox, and others. The Trump administration could, quote-unquote, improve on those tactics in a way that would have a chilling effect on journalism. There's a number of other issues. There's nonprofit news organizations that fear seeing their IRS status changed. There's concern about credentials. There's a laundry list of possibilities. And what I would say is journalists they're thinking about the worst-case scenarios and then hoping those won't happen.
Thank you, Brian. We close with a conversation I did with Megyn Kelly at Barnes & Noble on November 16th, 2016. Here's an excerpt from that conversation.
When you went to Fox, was that a dream come true for you?
Absolutely. I just wanted to be on TV. I didn't choose.
Did you want to be on TV or did you want to report?
I wanted to report the news on TV. I wanted to be a broadcast journalist.
There's a difference in terms of wanting to be a star and wanting to be a reporter.
Oh, I know this because actually not long after I got my job at Fox, my old friend, I won't identify her, but she had been on one season of The Apprentice, called me up and said, can you connect me with your agent and can you help get me an interview with your boss? And I said, well, what do you want to do? And she said, well, you know me. I really don't want to do any reading or research. I just want to be in the spotlight. I said, well, you know what? I will call my boss and I will see if there are any such openings available for a person like that, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
But no, I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, which after much soul searching, I had decided was the right fit for me and what I wanted to do. And so I got this resume tape going. I started cold calling news directors. Some poor soul named Bill Lord, who was at the ABC affiliate in Washington, D.C., gave me a job 1 day a week while I maintained my law job. And I loved it. I loved it. I felt just so invigorated by it. And then after 9 months, they offered me a full-time job, and then Fox offered me a full-time job. And that was when I knew I'd leave the law permanently.
And came to New York when?
I was in the D.C. bureau for about 3 years down at Fox, D.C., and then I came up here in 2007, January of 2007.
So where are you? Your contract's up in 2017.
Yeah.
You're deciding what?
What I want my life to be.
Yeah. And so give us some sense of that, though.
Well, I love my job. And
you love Fox?
I do. I've had a great 12 years there.
If you haven't had a program, if you haven't had a television show, you've missed something.
But I'm just saying, all the nonsense that gets spewed online, you know, the vitriol and just the nastiness, and there's been so much of it in the country this year, really, right? It's not just me or cable news, it's just in the country. Can really bring you down if you let it seep in. But when I sit at that anchor desk at night and I look into that lens, and honestly, I feel like I can see you. Like I can see you out there. I am, I think, in some ways, the best version of myself. You know, it feels like a real connection, and it's invigorating, it's uplifting. And so, given that and my love for my colleagues, you know, leaving Fox News would be very tough, but there happen to be some people I love even more than my colleagues, and they must be factored in as well.
You have spoken to me before about having a show that was more, in a sense, like what I do, and that had a wider net than simply politics, having to do with culture and authors and musicians and a range of that. You had a little taste of that, but Trump was a guest there. What is it that you hope you can add to your repertoire?
Well, that's the thing about me, is I'm, as I mentioned, not a political person. And yet I found myself in this job where pretty much all we discuss is politics. And I like politics. I like covering it. It's exciting. But it's not all of who I am. So it would be great if I could somehow manage to weave in other things that I find interesting. And he's interviewing Brian Dennehy for The Iceman Cometh. Like, that's a great job, right? What the hell kind of job is that? That's great.
No, but can you imagine doing anything other than journalism now? I mean, does anything have, what would it be?
You know, I don't know. It would be something that allowed me to see a lot more of my kids.
Really?
Honestly, I don't need all this. Right now...
You don't need the 20 million, do you?
No. I don't need any million.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't need any millions. I don't. However, I'm going to get paid what I'm worth.
Yeah. And where do you start the bidding?
What I need is those people and something to keep me intellectually stimulated. You know, I don't think I would be happy just like selling the jam. You know, like it'd have to be something that I found interesting, and I don't cook. So it can't be, the jam is out, even though the dream is always there for New Yorkers, isn't it? Like, Vermont, it's so close, like maybe, I don't know, the farmhouse, maybe I could learn how to ride a horse, right? Anyway, I don't know, Charlie, you know, if I were going to do something different, it would be something more holistic, I'll put it that way.
Megyn Kelly at Barnes & Noble, thank you for watching us. See you next time.